So this video is about cutting change gears for the Atlas 618 lathe. The Atlas 618 is a small benchtop home use lathe that was sold from about 1936 until 1974. And it uses a range of gears from 18 teeth up to 64 teeth in order to feed the carriage so that the carriage can move while you're cutting and cut threads into a piece of stock. So for instance, using the chart, you could install a certain number of gears in a certain configuration so that the carriage will move at the rate of 13 turns per inch. Then if you turned a piece of stock down to a ½ inch, put a thread cutting bit in the carriage, it would cut threads on that ½ inch stock at the rate of 13 threads per inch, and you would have a ½ inch coarse bolt. This Atlas 618 lathe does not have any of its original change gears. I could go buy a set for something over $100, but what's the fun in that? So I'm going to make my own set of gears. As you may know from my previous video, I've made gears in the past. And in the past, I used the traditional method, a numbered gear cutter that has the profile of the tooth groove for the size of gear that you're cutting. A gear with many teeth has a very narrow groove, and a gear with just a few teeth has a very wide open groove. So you have to use a different cutter for a different gear. So a full set of cutters is about $90. There's a problem though. Gear cutters are hard to find in 24 diametral pitch, which is the size of gears that I need to create. And secondly, I don't want to spend $100. If I spent $100, I could just buy a set of change gears. So I'm going to be trying a method that has a lot of promise, which is cutting gears using a gear cutting hob. Part of the definition of any gear, whether the gear is giant and has 500 teeth or whether the gear is very small and has only 9 teeth, is that it has to mesh with a gear rack. So it follows that if you could make a gear cutter that had the profile of a gear rack, that cutter could cut any size gear. That's what a gear hob does. So what we're going to be doing is mounting up a piece of tool steel in the lathe, and we are going to cut into that tool steel the profile of a 24 diametral pitch gear rack. Because this is a 14.5 degree pressure angle gear, we'll be using a cutting bit that has been ground to a V shape of precisely 29 degrees. Now, using some trigonometry reveals how deep the cutter has to be plunged into the work in order to leave the exact spacing and gaps that a 24 diametral pitch gear rack would have. It turns out that there is a reliable formula for a 14.5 degree pressure angle gear hob of exactly how far in to plunge the cutting bit. This page shows the formulas for a 20 degree pressure angle gear hob. One thing to note is that the only thing that we can reliably measure when we are plunging this tool cutting bit into the tool steel is when we have initially touched the tool steel with the very tip of the cutting bit, and then we know from our feed dial exactly how far in we've traveled since that point. But it should be noted that a cutting bit that is sharpened to a knife edge will simply bend or shear off or round over and be very difficult to cut. So for this reason, tool cutting bits have a 10 or 15 or 20 thousandths radius on the end of them so that the bit will stay sharper longer. But we need to know these calculations are only valid for the very point of the V. So what we can do to get around this is we can sharpen the tool cutting bit to a knife edge and then measure exactly how long it is. Then grind a small radius on the tool cutting bit and then measure how much we have removed. This difference in length is simply taken into account when you're cutting. So the bit I'm using is 42 thousandths. The length was reduced by 42 thousandths when I put a radius on the cutting bit. So when I plunge in the tool cutting bit, I will subtract the 42 thousandths from the total value that I am plunging in. Also note that the formulas are given either for a direct perpendicular cut into the side of the work or an angled cut. I think that the angled cut puts a little bit less load on the tip of the tool bit and produces a cleaner cut in the end. But whichever way you care to do it, you can use the formula to find the depth to which you should plunge your cutter. So, having turned down the 1/2 inch shank, I've flipped it around. And I've skimmed this just enough to get it clean and round. Next, I'm going to be plunging in this form tool. It's a 29 degree, which is 2 times 14.5 tool that's going to be plunged in basically like a parting tool, and it's going to leave a 29 degree V groove. I will do 5 or 6 grooves across here that are 0.1309 apart, and when I'm done, I should have the exact form of a gear rack. So I've just brought it up until it touches off, and I have just set the scale on my dial to 0 because I'm going to be plunging 136 thousandths. So by starting at 0, it gives me a nice easy target all the way around to 0 and then back into 36. Nice slow speed. In fact, the slow speed the lathe has. Plenty of oil. It's very much like a parting operation. 90 thousandths. Alright, there's 105. 130. 136. There it is. Groove number 1. 5 more to go. Alright, so I've now cut 6 rings. That means I have 5 teeth. And those 5 teeth mate with this gear quite nicely. So here it is with the side clearance cut. The reason the side clearance is necessary is so that when you're cutting a larger gear, you're not striking the finished gear teeth as the gear rotates around. I've got the cutter set up in the Spindexer. I'm going to be making 5 cuts. I've just finished the very first pass, and I don't know if you can tell, but it's a little bit past the center line, which will give a clearance angle. I'm going to be taking 5 slices out of this cutter, so it will have essentially 5 teeth. I did a study here in CAD. On the right hand circle you see a study if I take 4 slices, and it leaves a big arc of uncut tooth area that I then have to grind clearance. 6 leaves only 44 thousandths of tooth clearance area, and that's if I get everything perfect in my setup. So I think 6 is too many slices, 4 is not enough, so we're going to do 5. So on the Spindexer, it has 36 holes and 10 settings each. So the Spindexer can do 360 individual degrees. 36 divided by 5 turns out to be 72. So I need to move this Spindexer 7.2 notches in between. So we're currently set on 0. So I'm going to be moving it to put the pin in the 0.2. I'm going to be moving it to 7. Move it to 7. And then just a smidgen past 7, the 0.2 engages. I'm ready to take my next cut. All 5 flutes are cut. There it is after a deburr. So we've got nice clearance angle on where those front teeth are coming across. Should cut a pretty clean gear as far as I can tell. Now we have to clean it up to where we can see the color of the metal again instead of just the oxide that's on the surface. Once we can clean it up, then we'll heat it up to a light straw and quench it again, which will temper it. Using this little butane torch because I want to apply the heat a lot more slowly, because it gets to the temperature I want kind of suddenly. Secondly, I'm heating this shank to begin with because it's going to be kind of a heat sink. These ends out here are going to heat up more rapidly, but I'm trying to kind of anticipate where it's going to take the most heat and concentrate it there and then work it out to the ends. I'm beginning to see just a little color. I don't know if you can perceive the color change or not. There it is, light straw. So it's now been hardened and tempered back. So it's still very hard, but not so hard that it will shatter. Should now be a usable tool.